those old ideas. I just don't have the stomach for that. And there would be nothing that would bother me more than somebody saying that I fed into that, or I fed that monster. So with that in mind, I almost make a point, and I didn't do that in this book, but when I talk about some of those characters, there was this guy who used to come in the store on Wednesdays at 2:00 every day, every week, 2:00 on Wednesdays. He'd come in, and every Wednesday at 2 p.m. he'd get a creamsicle, and he would eat that creamsicle too fast, and he'd get that pain in his forehead. And he would ask my uncle, why is it when you eat a creamsicle too fast, you get that pain? Like, this was, you could set your watch by this. And at the same time, I'd be there going, this is comedy. This is great. At the same time, I heard that guy built a house without using a measuring tape.
Right.
That he had inherited and developed those skills that he can cut clapboard without needing a measuring tape. That he can, build I heard that once somebody's fiberglass, the front of their skidoo had broke in a storm or something, that fiberglass front, he rebuilt it with wood, and nobody could tell the difference. And again, he doesn't like using measuring tapes or levels or anything like that. He doesn't need them.
Right.
Right? Like, this is the kind of brilliance we're talking about. So I never want to blur those lines. I never want to, what I tried to do in my writing is if I did tell a story that was even subtly, I don't know the right word to say it, but let me just say that I made a point of being respectful at every opportunity of everybody I encountered, because you kind of had a good point earlier, recalling experiences that were impactful. Everybody I encountered on Fogo Island those years, whether I was pumping their gas and they give me a little story, or they give me a little something, or I was hitchhiking across the island, everybody was just glad to see me.
Yeah.
Everybody, like you talk about people visiting Change Islands this summer, they were just open arms. They'd invite me over. They'd say, come in for a cup of tea. Right?
Yeah, it was, and they still do. Like, these are grown people, like your age and older, that still, when they go home, they still call it home, even though they weren't raised there. They go home,
right.
and it's the same thing. Now they're dropping into, see old Mrs. So-and-so that used to, let them play ball in the garden, or, this is how it just has evolved, and it's just the way it is. And open doors, open hearts, open arms, and come on in. You're a stranger, but you're welcome. And you see it all the time with we don't call tourists, we do in the professional sense, but when people come to Change Islands, for example, if you're talking to someone who is involved in the industry, normally it's an artist or local artisan, or the pony sanctuaries down there. They're visitors. We had a lot of visitors today. How many people were in the my daughter worked, actually my daughter, she was 14 last year, 15, she worked at the Interpretation Center on Change Islands last summer as a student, which was an incredible opportunity. And when, you to ask them, well, was it a busy day? Oh yeah, we had a lot of visitors today. They don't say tourists, it's just the visitors. They're just stopping by to visit. And so even that sort of tiny little difference in language, as viewing the people as a guest. These are people who are visiting, and you're going to have a cup of tea, and it's a whole other, to me, thought than a tourist, right? It's so much more personal. And it's not planned. It's just the way that people are. These people are coming, and they're visitors. And I think they do it in Fogo Island and Change Islands, and Twillingate as well. That's what you hear. There's a lot of visitors around this time of year, and so and I love that. I find that
isn't that lovely?
Really endearing, and just another unique little quirk of our language, but it's such a nice positive one. And I love our language. I try to, like, when you go away and you're surrounded by, you're in Ontario. For me, now this is, I grew up on Change Islands, so I spent 25 years in Ontario, and the minute I would hear, it was like East Coast dialect radar, right? You'd be in the Sears, and three counters over, somebody talk, and you go, "Oh my gosh, he's from Newfoundland." And so you're from the East Coast, and you don't have to start up a chat. And I moved back 6 years ago, and I nearly got whiplash because everybody had an East Coast dialect, and I wasn't hearing. You know what I mean? So, oh yeah, I'm in Newfoundland. That's right. That's why they're talking that way. I don't have to strike up a conversation, ask where they're from. But it's funny because it's turned around now. I will be somewhere, and I'll hear someone, and I'll go, "Oh, they sound like they might be from rural Ontario."
That's
got a bit of a they've got because if you go to, like, I lived in southwestern Ontario, Kitchener, Waterloo, Stratford, that area, and so we were really near the Mennonite country, and so they have a bit of a the Amish and Mennonites have a bit of a, well, their German language is their original language, and they have just a little bit of a dialect, and I can pick that up now, and so it's all turned around for me, and it's like, oh, sounds like it's from Ontario. And I even do it with television. I was watching a show with the kids a few months back, and I went, that girl talks like she's from Vancouver. Because I had a friend who was from Vancouver, and she had a very sort of, they even say kind Vancouver different.
Like this, and maybe like that.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
They have there's something. And I Googled her, and sure enough, she was from Vancouver. And I'm I didn't have a clue. And so, because I had a friend who was from Vancouver, and I think you develop an ear for the dialects. If you have it, you have it. But I just thought it was for Newfoundland and the East Coast. But no, apparently that's something that I can do, is like, oh, they talk like they're from. But of course, you have to have experience of, the dialect that you're hearing. I wouldn't be able to go to England and tell which part of England the dialect is, but you did hit on something. It's almost like cove to cove, the dialects and the words can change.
It's true.
I live on Change Islands, which is one community, and I know there were people that were like the very next garden, like we're here, and around the cove there's another, and they used words we didn't use. It was the strangest thing, and I don't know why.
My dad. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't know why. It was the strangest thing.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. My dad was a bus driver in Toronto, and he would come home quite often, and he would say that night, well, this guy came on, and he said to me, could you tell me when we get to Markham Road? And my dad would identify his Newfoundland accent, and he'd say, sure, it's just, you stay on this bus till 5 stops or whatever. Right. And my dad would say, what part of Newfoundland are you from? Because my dad had this, was trained. He talked to people all day long, and he could pick out Cape Breton accents. He can pick out Newfoundland accents. He was amazing at it. But the one funny thing I found, and this is kind of an interesting observation that he made, if they weren't from Port aux Basques, Corner Brook, Deer Lake, Gander, St. Anthony, or St. John's, they would give you one of those towns that they were closest to.
Right.
So they'd say, "Oh, I'm from Gander."
Yeah.
And they say, "Oh, Gander. You live in Gander proper?" Because I have a brother in Gander proper. Well, not quite Gander. And then you find out he's from Stoneville, right? Whatever. Right. And then my dad would say, you must know. And then by the end of it, it's like, oh, yeah, it turns out that we're brothers the whole time. Yes. I'm exaggerating with the brothers part. But, I always kind of waited, because sometimes they would get so intense that, this person knew somebody who we camped with at the trailer park that they're from the same neighborhood or the same community in Newfoundland. But I kept on waiting for Dad to come home and say, finally, I looked over and it was Dad. It was his father the whole time. Because the whole time they would just get elevated of. It turns out that guy is our first cousin. It's like, well, how did that happen? Did he know you? But he always knew. But he could pick that out, and I never could quite like he could. This is something else you probably remembered from when you were here. I will talk to I'll talk to my Uncle Al or something on the phone, or one of my other relatives on a Sunday afternoon, I'll get off the phone and I'll be talking to my wife, and she'll say, "Okay, can you come back to Ontario now?" And I'll say, "What do you mean?" She said, "The Newfoundland accent. Could you?"
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I won't even realize.
No.
I swear that it's there.
I swear, driving. If I would often drive home, and on the drive down, and I mean, I didn't completely lose my accent. It's sort of mixed up a little bit, but I still talk a little bit fast and, in regular conversation and stuff. But I would be driving down, and I swear, the minute we passed Quebec, it would start to change. Because you'd start talking, you stop in the gas, the Irving, and in New Brunswick. Well, there's a little East Coast thing, and you know what I mean. And by the time I got to the ferry, it was full on, completely back till I got back in Ontario again. And it's just and I've been in rooms with people who had never heard me speak full on like a Newfoundlander, like from Change Islands. I mean, I grew up with that. That's my first language. And they'd never heard it because they only knew me in Ontario. And then, in a mixed group where there's some Newfoundlanders and some people from Ontario, all of a sudden they're like, I don't even know what you're saying. What are you doing? I didn't even know you could even do that. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. This is who I am. This is it. I've had 2 drinks now, and I'm with my people. This is the language that we are speaking, the language of our people. So, and of course I do here. Yeah, and so you do a little.
I think it's important. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, it's just you do a little flip back and forth, right? Because 25 years. When I moved back, I'd been in Ontario longer than I'd been in Newfoundland, and I'd worked in media and worked, communication and stuff. So you really want to be understood, and so you do, water it down a little bit and slow down a little bit.
That's
you learn to speak, and you learn, but it never ever went away. Like I go sit and talk to my uncles, and I don't talk like I'm talking to you now. I don't.
No,
it's a totally different.
No, but
thing.
At the same time, I don't apologize for it, and I never will. And I don't have an accent like my cousins have, who were there for 12 months a year, opposed to my month and a half or 2 months a year. I think it's something that actually I love that we have our own Rex Murphy dictionary, and I love that we have an actual a cultural awareness that this is legitimate, that this actually means something, that those words actually came from the fact that people lived in these outports for a couple of hundred years without really the outside world, with the only exposure of the outside world being by boat. You're going to pick up those little dialects. You're going to have those little things that are limited not only to community to community, but literally house by house. I think it's wonderful. Just in closing here, I want to share with you, Carolyn, we've been really pleased. We just released the book near the end of December, which is the wrong time to release a book. It should have been near the end of November. But we've been really, really pleased with the number of books that we've sold in Newfoundland. And the ones that we've sold in Ontario have been mostly people like myself who at one point are from Newfoundland or have some connection to Newfoundland. And people have been identifying with it. And amongst that, I will say the most flattering feedback I've gotten are from people like yourself who've been to Fogo Island, who've been to Change Island, who've been to the Notre Dame Bay, and who've said to me, I read that and I identified with it. I know what you're talking about, and it brought me back to a certain time and place. And that's where I feel, the number of times that I read it over and changed a little thing here and changed a little thing there to make it the way I wanted it to be. I think all of a sudden I hear those comments and I think, well, those hours were worth it, and you've probably, as a writer, you've probably experienced that yourself.
Well, I hope so. Well, I have, and I hope so with the new book as well. The new book is definitely my most Newfoundland-centric work.
Wonderful.
And so
Wonderful.
I've been working on it for a number of years, so I'm excited for it to get out there. But where can we get your book now? Is it available in the province to buy, or is it
It is
online?
available in the province.